Although they have different core ideologies, the U.S. Republican and Democrat parties are actually like two wings of the same aircraft. Because the racism of the Republican Party is more prevalent and more blatantly obvious than those of the Democrats, this gives African Americans the illusion that equality can be obtained by voting for the Democratic Party. But the hidden reality is that both parties are actually secretly unrelentingly committed towards the preservation of their nation's white social dominance and social capital over the black population. Therefore, both parties work together behind the scenes to meet those objectives that are against the interests of the African American population. However, if African Americans pay close attention to the feuding that's taking place between the Democrats and the Republicans, there's much to learn that benefits ourselves. Case, point, and proof. Currently, millions of working class and poor white Republican voters now takes an anti-stance against universal health coverage, even though they all benefit from it. Millions of working class and poor white Republican women now supports a party that agenda erodes women's rights. Millions of working class and poor white Republican voters now votes against their own self-interest and instead in ways serving the wealthy Republicans. This was achieved through repetitive media propaganda campaigns from watching only conservative media. The media shapes our perception of the world around us. It steers our sympathies and tells us who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. It tells us which position to take on any given situation. The media programming that we repetitively watch programs our minds. That's why it's called programming. The media that we watch shapes our perception and beliefs. If you're not a critical thinker, the media can even shape your perceptions and beliefs in ways that are against your own interests. Many black people often ponder the question of how is it possible that millions of working white class and poor whites can be made to think in ways that are against their own self-interest. Many ask, why can't they see the truth that's right in front of their faces? I always find it amusingly ironic of how many black people respond in that manner. I find this ironic because likewise, the exact same brainwashing tactic had been done to black people. Millions of black people have been brainwashed to think in ways that places the interests of the white society above their own. In fact, the Republican Party's ability to do so effectively manipulate the minds of the poor and working class white masses to think against their own interests was perfected by knowledge gained by doing it first to African Americans. This is not a silly conspiracy theory. The manipulations of large targeted population to think in ways that are against their own interests through media's subliminal propaganda is a feat that the ruling class have totally mastered. It's a well-proven social science. Furthermore, if the manipulation of the minds of large targeted populations through media propaganda campaigns was not a true and real science, the U.S. government would not have indicted 12 Russians for manipulating the minds of American voters during the 2016 election. The U.S. government knows that it's a real, well-proven science because it has worked extremely well at manipulating the minds of African Americans. It's no strange occurrence that many African Americans are now self-loathing, perceives ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres and defends Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history of the contrary. The collective aggressions of the black masses have been shifted away from the white society and have been redirected towards ourselves. This isn't hard to figure out once you start critically thinking. Just ask yourself, who does this change within the African American culture benefit? And who controls the media content that are systematically being fed into our minds? The answer to both questions, of course, is the white establishment. And given their corrupt, narcissistic history, logically, they're going to exploit their monopoly over the media content that are fed into our minds to garner an outcome among us that benefits themselves. Those know the changes within the collective minds of the black masses that clearly benefits the white society were deliberately indoctrinated into our mind through black media social engineering without us even realizing it. Media social engineering is also the true reason why millions of us now self-identify by the N-word, refer to our women by the B-word, sags our pants below our asses, and glorifies pimps. This is not scapegoating. It's the absolute truth. Okay, now returning to the subject of our political parties. There's actually much to learn by studying the feuding that has taken place between both parties since Trump's presidency. If black people pay close attention to the tactics that a Republican uses to hold on to power over the Democrats, we'll realize that the same tactics that they're using was used by the white society to maintain power over the black population. Case, point, and proof. Remember during the Trump administration, regardless of what grievances regarding Trump's behaviors that the Democrats expressed before the Republican Party, they never acknowledged any of it. They instead kept deflecting and distracting from the issue until the Democrats became mentally fatigued and stopped bringing up the issue. This tactic prevented the issue from ever gaining any traction, any societal traction. And it gave Trump the nickname Teflon Trump because no accusation stuck to him. It's actually the same gaslighting tactic that the white government deploys against black people. White social scientists determined that it was during the 1960s, that it was by acknowledging the grievances of the black protests that those protests gained societal legitimacy and traction. Therefore, in 1968, after the assassination of Dr. King, the white establishment stopped acknowledging black grievances. They started preceding all of our grievances with claims with a quote that it's alleged. Black people are alleging, such as to say African Americans allegedly claims that white racism is still a major problem in the U.S. Allegedly. The word allegedly actually undermines the credibility of the black protest. Today, it's a very common practice. Nowadays, whenever black people present any claims of white injustices, the white establishment never fully acknowledged none of them. Instead of acknowledging them, the problem, they say it's alleged. And they also respond by presenting counter-narrative that undermines and distracts from the black protests. This is the hidden truth behind the narrative that all lives matter. All lives matters has never been the ideology held by the white establishment. Never has. The history proves this. That's actually a counter-narrative created and propagated to distract and deflect from the declaration that Black Lives Matter. It also intentionally designed to diffuse the moral statement of Black Lives Matter while diverting attention away from the issue of white cops routinely killing innocent unarmed black people. Within this gaslighting psychological warfare system, the white establishment is never acknowledged as morally wrong, and the black oppressed population is never acknowledged as morally correct. Information is instead always twisted, spun, and or selectively omitted to always favor the oppressors. The white establishment never legitimizes any of the grievances expressed by the black population. This practice is continued until the black protesters begin to doubt the legitimacy of their own positions and stop protesting, becoming so mentally fatigued. Many began to doubt their reasons for protesting, thinking that if their cause isn't being recognized by the white dominant society, then perhaps it lacks merit. The mind is easy to manipulate when the victims are unaware of the tactic that's being deployed against them. This gaslighting tactic is also what's actually being done to black people when the white establishment labels us as being racist towards whites whenever we speak out against white racism. This tactic shifts the focus away from the white racism that's been expressed by the black protester and then forces the black protester to instead engage in defending him or herself against the false accusation of white racism. Meanwhile, the true issue of white racism is never being addressed by the white establishment. This gaslighting system allows the white oppressors to treat all issues of racism or inequalities presented by the black population like you would a can being repeatedly kicked down the road. Rather than picking up the can and addressing it, just keep kicking it down the road, metaphorically speaking, while never addressing the actual issue that's being presented by the black population. They continue this gaslighting tactic until the black protesters become mentally fatigued and stop protesting. Not all wars are fought on the battlefield. Most are fought in the mind. This is especially true when regarding to domestic warfare. Within this gaslighting psychological warfare system, the oppressors never acknowledges any of the grievances being expressed by the oppressed. The white establishment is never acknowledged as morally wrong, and the black oppressed is never acknowledged as morally correct. This practice is continued until the black protesters begin to doubt their own position, and many begin to doubt their reasons for protesting, thinking that if it's not being recognized by the dominant society, it lacks legitimacy. And then it shifts us against our own selves, making us angry at each other. The minds of targeted populations are easy to manipulate if they're unaware of what's being done to them. Once the mind has been confused, manipulation becomes simple. The mind will even ignore common sense, and rationality falls away, even overlooking hypocrisy and deception. Black people are the unknowing victims of the worst gaslighting abuse in world history. This isn't victim peddling, as so many of you have been brainwashed to think and respond. It's the truth. I'm sorry. I realize that I've told you the truth is that we're the unknowing victims of the worst gaslighting abuse in history. But I didn't consider that many people may not know what gaslighting is. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse used by a narcissistic group in order to instill in their victim an extreme sense of anxiety and confusion to the point where they no longer trust their own memory and perception or judgment. The technique used in gaslighting by the narcissistic group are similar to those used in brainwashing, interrogations, and torture that have been used in psychological warfare by intelligence operative, law enforcement, and other forces for decades. The intention is to, in a systematic way, the target victim's mental confidence is eroded and their self-esteem, and they start to doubt their entire perception. And you can mentally cause them to cave in to your view because you're not acknowledging their view. This is the tactic that's being deployed against our people. You know, we've been conditioned to believe that our worst threat are the KKK or the skinheads. But no, our worst threat are the white social scientists and white propagandists that systematically deploys propaganda against our minds. Through their monopoly over the information that's fed into our minds, they've created a psychological prison for our minds. Those of us who tell you the truth are trying to free you from a mental prison that you don't even know you're in. The most ignorant and most mentally enslaved and most far-fetched thing that a black person can say is that we are not our worst enemies. Those black people who says that and believes that are the most ignorant, gullible, naive, and the most mentally enslaved among us. Our enemies, our worst enemies, are the same who it was 400 years ago, 500 years ago. It's time to wake up to our reality. One love and peace.